Hey guys, welcome back to ASUS Creators Academy. Today we'll get right into the heart of the matter. Let's talk about photo editing using Adobe Lightroom Classic. Oh, but it's not just any photo editing, for we're going to focus specifically on smartphone photography. I'm sure everyone likes to take a photo every now and then, but not all of us own a professional camera, and neither would we bring it around every day. It goes without saying that the next best thing is right in your pocket. Your smartphone. Smartphone cameras are getting ever more powerful these days, and it's what we take the most photos with. So let's dive into editing smartphone photos and attempt to bring them to the next level. The first thing you would need is of course a computer. Preferably something like this ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo, which we'll be using for this tutorial. Generally, something with the Intel Core i7 and GeForce RTX 3060 will serve you well for the next few years, especially with regards to editing photos and video. Performance is something that you would want here for sure. But in any case, let's get into the tutorial, and for today we'll be using Lightroom Classic. So let's look at the photos that we have, and here, let's choose this. So let's go ahead into develop, and let's develop this photo. This is a pretty famous place. It's a photo of the Brandenburg Gate located in Berlin. If you've been there in person, it really looks impressive. As you can tell from this photo, which came straight out from the smartphone, the colors are a little bit flat, a little bit more muted and dull, though the weather and time of day also plays a part as well. Now the first thing that you would want to do is scroll down to the transform tab and select level. So this function will basically help you level your photo automatically and make it straight, so you no longer have to measure or second guess. Next, you will want to move down into lens correction and select remove chromatic aberration. Now what chromatic aberration refers to is the color fringing that's caused by materials and surfaces reflecting light into the lens and how it's captured on the sensor. What you would usually see are purple or greenish lines on the edges of objects, especially metallic surfaces. So this feature will basically help you remove the most of it. Now at this point, you can choose to crop your photo or not. Since we are mainly editing this photo for something like Instagram and it's in portrait, we can actually crop it in the 4:5 aspect ratio. It's up to you on how you want to frame your subject, but for this we require little adjustment. Just got to make sure that our subject, the statue on top, is nice and centered, and basically that's about it. And now we can get into the basic corrections. Now the main thing that you would want to do here is that you want to bring back as much detail as you can. Now you will face a threshold since this isn't a raw photo but just a standard JPEG from your smartphone, which means there's already post-processing done. But with that said, you can still save a little. So the main thing that you want to do right here is that you want to bring down the highlights, and then you want to lift the shadows a little bit so that it's not that dark. And then you can go ahead and adjust the whites and black. Usually you would want to bring it down a little, and the whites as well, the blacks, both of them just a tad down. So you're using the shadows to compensate for bringing down the blacks. Now if you're using a laptop that has a dual screen function like the ZenBook Pro Duo, which also has built-in functionality to complement the Lightroom Classic software, you can actually just use your finger and adjust as you may. That might be much more easier for you, and actually it's pretty intuitive. Go ahead, adjust the whites and the blacks, and that's just about it. Now here's one tip. To make sure you're not clipping as much as possible, whenever you're adjusting the whites and blacks, you can actually hold down onto the alternate key, and you can then see where you're actually clipping. So as you can tell, this is definitely clipping. As you can tell, these are the parts of the image that's clipping, so you wouldn't want to do that. Same for the blacks. If you press alternate and pull onto the sliders, you can see where you're exactly clipping, and this is basically where things are black, like fully black, no details whatsoever. So you wouldn't want that. You want to retain as much detail as possible. Now you can go ahead and adjust the temperature and the tint. Same thing, just pull on the sliders, and in general you just don't want to go overboard. For this photo, you'll just go a little bit warmer, maybe a +3 or +4, roughly about there. And for the tint, we are going to just give it a little bit more of a purple tint, because as you can see, the green is actually quite overpowering here. We can now move over to the HSL tab, and this is where you can actually set the kind of mood for the photo. At this point, it really is up to your own creativity and what you intend to achieve, so go all out if you would like. The only thing to take note is if you have people in your photo, you don't want to push it too far because your people, well, human skin tone, especially with saturation, it's going to start looking quite funky. So in our case, we'll probably just lower the reds a bit, up the orange a little, and probably play more of the greens because as you can tell, the main focus of our photo is the statue on top. So up a little bit of the greens, the aquas, slightly of the blues, and you probably don't want to touch too much of purple and magenta, which will affect skin tone much more. Now same thing for the saturation, just a little bit more of the greens, a little bit more aquas, blues for the skies as well. And then we have add just a tinge of red to bring it back. Same thing for luminance, you want to bring a bit more orange, but for now we're going to bring down the reds. But same thing, we're going to bring up the blues and aquas and just adjust as you see fit. As you can tell, if you actually bring down the blues quite a bit, you can see more of the detail from the clouds coming in. So this might be quite interesting. Let's go with this. Now once you're done with the HSL tab, you can now add a little bit of detail. So go into the detail tab, and here is where you can add a little bit of sharpening, which will help to make the smaller elements in your photos pop just a little more. Of course, again, don't go too overboard because if not, it'll look too artificial. So let's adjust the amount, perhaps increase the radius slightly and masking a little. You can even add a little bit of noise reduction. And let's just push the sharpening a tad more. So if you actually go in and see the details on the top of the gate, you can tell that it's getting sharpened quite a bit. If you push all the way, yeah, this is what you get, which is something that you definitely do not want. We then move on to the tone curve, and this is where you want to do a very gentle S-curve. Now the main thing is that you want to do a point curve, you want to edit the point curve. So you just add a small point at the bottom and a small point on top, followed by a small point in the center to create the 3 points where you can adjust and make an S-curve. Now you don't want to do too much to the center, this basically brightens up all the mids and stuff like that. So maybe just a little. And the main thing is you also want to reduce or rather decrease the amount of blacks or the maximum black in the scene. So you can move it up just a tad, maybe around 7, 9 or so. And as for the whites, same thing, adjust the point down a little. Right, so at this point, if you want to see what you have been doing thus far, you can actually compare the difference just by clicking on the Y key. And this will bring up the before and after. As you can tell, it's not really that big of a difference compared to editing a raw photo, but we've cleaned it up slightly and pushed the focus on color to the statue by kind of desaturating the rest and making the statue green pop up a little more. But of course, next we can make it better. And this is where the magic happens, color grading. So let's go to the color grading tab, and this is where things change quite a bit. It's up to your preference of what you want to do, but for our photo here, we're gonna add a little bit of blues to the shadows and perhaps a little bit of orange to the highlights to create more of that moody kind of contrast. So first thing first, let's adjust the shadows and give it a little bit more blues. Now of course you can tell it's way too much if you go too much, so you don't want to do that. Just move a little bit more to the blues, and that's about it. This is for the mid-tones. Same thing for the shadows, slightly bluer. So give the kind of overcast look, and for the highlights, perhaps more orangey. Additionally, if you want to make the colors blend a little more, you can adjust the blending just a little, and that's about it. Now at this point, if you want to make it just a little bit more contrasty and a little bit more interesting, you can add an effect, which is the very common effect that a lot of people would know by now, a vignette. So if you just add a little bit, it will actually kind of lead your eyes to the focus point of this image, which is the statue on top of the Brandenburg Gate. And that's about it. If you want to see the before and after, remember, you can just click Y. The photo of this Brandenburg Gate now looks just a little bit more grungy and a little bit more artistic in a way, with the main focus being that green on the statue above the Brandenburg Gate. You can of course go back and edit it further, refine it further, But in essence, you've now got a slightly more unique photo with a certain style. Okay, so now with all that in mind, let's move on to something that we all would do, especially when we are traveling abroad. Let's do food photography. Now this is a burger, as you can tell, and in this case, more often than not when you're talking about food photography, we are not looking for a certain mood here, but rather to make the food pop, to make it look ever the more delectable. In this case, let's make this burger as delicious looking as can be. Now unlike the previous photo, we don't have to level nor remove chromatic aberration, so just a simple crop will do. So we can again go back into adjust on top of basic, go to your crop overlay and choose the crop that you want. Now since most icons and photos of food and stuff or menus are square, let's do a square crop, and in essence that also kind of plays nicely with Instagram as well. Adjust the photo such that the burger is right smack center and click enter. So let's go ahead and do that and add a bit of exposure and contrast by just adjusting the sliders, which you can do with your mouse or you can just do with your hand on the touchscreen using the ZenBook Pro Duo, which is really handy, I have to say. It's really more intuitive. Feels like you're editing on the tablet instead more so than a laptop. So let's adjust the exposure. Let's increase the contrast a little. Okay, let's go to 0.44 instead. Alright. Up the contrast to +31. Next, you want to bring down the highlights and lift the shadows to get a little bit more details. So let's bring down the highlights. Again, you can use your mouse or you can use the sliders on the touchscreen. Up to you. And you'll want to bring down the whites and blacks as well. Now, since we are looking at a burger and food in particular, we want it to be more saturated. So you want that lettuce, tomato and cheese to really stand out. But again, same as before, you don't want it to be too overboard, so just up the vibrance and the saturation just a tad, and now it should look a lot more delicious. So we can now go ahead and adjust the temperatures, make it a slightly warmer, and adjust the tint as well. We don't want it to be too greenish or pinkish. Again, the vibrance and saturation just a little bit more. We now move on to the HSL tab, and on the Hue tab, we want to really make the burger pop. So as you can tell, the burger has mainly red, green and yellow colors. So let's focus on those hues. So let's up the reds a little. Orange, which is a little bit more red. The yellows as well. Want to really make it yellow. The green, which will mainly affect the lettuce. Again, don't go too overboard because if not, yep, this is what you get and it definitely looks too artificial. So just a little bit will do. Same for the aqua. And the blues, which looks, you can tell it's affecting the packaging on the table and the road itself, so you don't want to go too overboard either. And just a little bit of purple and magenta. Same for the saturation, you want to up the greens, blues, the reds, the orange, which is mainly what the loaf is, some of the yellow for the cheese, and McDonald's sign behind it. As for luminance, same thing. Let's up the yellows, the orange, the greens, but this time we bring down the blues slightly. So we have now adjusted most of the colors with the HSL tab, and if you don't believe me that it looks much more delicious right now, go ahead and press Y and you can now tell a clear-cut difference between the unedited and the edited photo. The edited photo of the burger definitely looks so much more delicious. To further refine it, we can then add a vignette, which really makes the burger the focal point of the photo. Now we go up to the tone curve, and again, let's just do a very gentle S curve, which will make the burger pop ever so slightly. As mentioned, if you find that it's a little bit too much, you can always go back to the basics and adjust from there to kind of balance everything out. So there you go, a much more delicious looking burger. Just looking at the two photos side by side, I'm definitely more inclined to take a bite from the one on the right. Again, these are just JPEGs straight out from a smartphone. So honestly, it doesn't take that much work and effort to make your photos stand out just that much more. As you can see, even though these photos were taken with a smartphone in standard JPEGs no less, we can still very much improve it and make them better. If you're interested in everything else that ASUS Creators Academy has to offer, please do check out the links in the description. There is so much more in store and we are sure that there will be one that will suit your fancy. With that said, have fun editing and we will see you guys in the next one.